Chapter 1. The Unexpected Inheritance. Elliot Morrison was used to disappointment. The world was a place where luck didn't favor him, and that had been the unrelenting truth of his life. He'd never expected much, and, in turn, much was what he got. He worked in a small repair shop, a dingy little place tucked into a corner of a bustling metropolis, where the only thing keeping him busy was a string of broken vending machines and malfunctioning escalators. He was good at his job, no doubt about it. He could fix just about anything that didn't require the attention of a certified expert. Yet, despite his skill and expertise, Elliot never seemed to catch a break. No promotions, no new opportunities, no changes in his routine. The only thing constant in his life was the hum of the machines he worked on and the monotony of the people who walked past the shop without a second glance. Life wasn't bad, but it was as close to mediocre as it could get. That was until the letter came. The envelope, a bright blue with the embossed seal of a law firm, arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. There was nothing particularly special about the day itself. Clouds hung low in the sky. The traffic was as chaotic as always, and the hum of the city felt as oppressive as usual. Elliot hadn't even noticed the letter when it slipped through the gap in his apartment door, buried as it was under a pile of discarded bills and overdue notices. It was only when he heard the slight, muffled knock at his door, followed by the faint thud of the letter falling in his direction, that he noticed. At first glance, it seemed like just another piece of junk mail, another letter from some debt collector, or a subscription offer to some magazine he didn't need. But when he picked it up and saw the law firm's name, his stomach flipped. Mendelsohn, Hartwell, and Larkin, it read, in elegant, silver lettering. The names sounded official, serious, something that had weight behind it. Something that was not part of Elliot's usual world. He didn't even know why he opened it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was just a moment of weakness, but whatever it was, he tore the envelope open with a sense of dread that only grew with every passing second. The letter inside was neatly folded, the edges crisp and sharp, and as Elliot unfolded it, he was hit by a smelling, unusual mix of paper and something faintly metallic, like it had been printed on an old press or bound by something that didn't quite belong. It was thick and formal, the kind of paper that made you stop for a second and wonder if you were in trouble, even before you read a word. With a deep breath, he started reading. The letter was a formal notification addressed directly to him, Elliot Morrison, detailing something so bizarre it might as well have been a prank. Dear Mr. Morrison, we regret to inform you that you are the sole heir to the estate of one Valcor Athari, a non-terrestrial citizen and former owner of the Vanguard, a starship of considerable origin. As per the terms of the late Mr. Athari's will, it is our duty to inform you that you have inherited both the vessel and all of its contents. We request that you arrange a meeting with us at your earliest convenience to discuss the necessary steps involved in the transfer of ownership. Sincerely, Mendelsohn, Hartwell, and Larkin, attorneys at law. He read it once. Then, he read it again. And again. His mind struggled to make sense of the words, his eyes scanning over them as though looking for some hidden meaning, something that would explain how an alien had just named him the sole heir to a starship. A starship. The word didn't even make sense. The letter wasn't a joke. There were no hints or nudges that would indicate someone was pulling a prank on him. No, this was serious. The fact that a starship was somehow part of his inheritance made no sense, but there it was, written in black and white. As he held the letter in his hands, Elliot's world shifted. He sat there for a long time, his mind racing through 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. The idea of owning a starship, of suddenly being thrust into a world far beyond his understanding, felt completely out of place in his life. He didn't have a background in anything space-related. He wasn't rich, wasn't a scientist, wasn't anyone who had ever dreamed of traveling the stars. Yet, here he was, sitting in his dimly lit apartment, reading a letter that claimed he had inherited the very thing that most people on Earth could only fantasize about. He didn't know what to do with it. His head swam with 1,000 questions. Asterisk, who was Valcor Athari? Why me? What is the Vanguard? What's going on here? And yet, despite all of the confusion, there was something else, something deeper that gnawed at him, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't entirely out of place. After all, his life had been full of mundane repairs and an endless cycle of mediocrity, but now, something had changed. He didn't know what, but he felt it in his gut. It was a call to adventure, even though he had never been one to entertain such ideas. He thought about the starship, the Vanguard, and what it must look like. Was it really a massive vessel, something beyond the size and scope of anything he could comprehend? Or was it just a pile of junk, some sort of alien relic left to rot in a forgotten corner of space? Either way, the idea of it filled him with a mix of dread and excitement, two emotions that had never been part of his life, certainly not in combination. What kind of man would inherit an alien starship? What kind of man would be able to handle such a responsibility? And why had this alien, whoever he was, chosen Elliot for this? It didn't make sense. He didn't know the first thing about starships, space, or even how to fly a vehicle of that magnitude. But there was something in the back of his mind that pushed him forward, the sense that maybe he didn't need to know anything at all. Maybe the universe had bigger plans for him. After all, why else would an alien starship be entrusted to someone like him? The lawyer's contact details were included at the bottom of the letter, and without thinking, Elliot grabbed his phone, dialed the number, and waited. The line clicked once, twice, and then a voice on the other end spoke, smooth and formal. Mendelsohn, Hartwell, and Larkin, how may I assist you? Hi, Elliot said, trying to steady his voice. My name's Elliot Morrison. I received a letter about some, inheritance. He heard the slight pause on the other end before the voice responded. Mr. Morrison. Yes, of course. We were expecting your call. Please, if you would come into our office at your earliest convenience, we will arrange everything for you. There are documents to be signed, and a few formalities to discuss. Your inheritance involves several complexities, and we will be happy to assist you in any way we can. The lawyer's voice was reassuring, almost comforting, and the promise of answers made Elliot's heart race. I'll be there as soon as I can, he said, feeling a strange sense of urgency. Hanging up the phone, he sat back in his chair, the letter still in his hands, his mind spinning with possibilities. Whatever this was, whatever the truth behind it was, his life had just been turned upside down. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever was coming next, but one thing was certain. He was about to get a whole lot more than he bargained for. The next few hours were a blur. Elliot packed a bag, grabbed a quick lunch, and headed to the lawyer's office. It was located in the heart of the city, a towering skyscraper that reflected the afternoon sun in its glass walls. Walking inside felt surreal. He was just a mechanic, a man who repaired vending machines. Yet here he was, standing in the lobby of a high-end law firm that dealt with things far beyond his comprehension. He was led through the gleaming halls, past polished floors and expensive artwork, until he reached the office where his life would change forever. The lawyer, a tall man with neatly combed hair and sharp features, greeted him warmly, ushering him into the meeting room. On the table was a stack of paperwork, but Elliot's gaze was drawn to the holographic display in the corner. It showed an image of a massive starship, gleaming and impossibly advanced, floating in the void of space. It was the Vanguard. This is real, Elliot thought, his pulse quickening. He wasn't sure what kind of ride he was in for, but one thing was clear: his boring, predictable life was over. Whatever came next, he was in for the adventure of a lifetime. Elliot sat in the lawyer's office, surrounded by pristine furniture and sleek surfaces, his heart still racing from the absurdity of the situation. The lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Gregory Hartwell, was sitting across from him, flipping through a thick binder of documents. The air felt stiff, almost suffocating, and Elliot's fingers gripped the armrest of the chair, as if holding on for dear life. Everything around him seemed so out of place. His worn jeans and casual shirt felt completely out of sync with the polished office, the high-end furniture, and the stacks of legal paperwork that looked far more serious than anything he'd ever seen in his life. He wasn't sure what to make of this situation. An alien starship? A ship with a name as ridiculous as Vanguard? It felt like the kind of wild fantasy he would hear about in a sci-fi novel, something his younger self would have been obsessed with reading before reality took over. But here he was, sitting in front of a lawyer, learning that this was his inheritance. The reality of it hadn't fully settled in. Gregory Hartwell finally looked up from the stack of papers and placed a thick file in front of Elliot. Mr. Morrison, he began, his voice smooth and polished, I'm sure you're wondering how this all works. The inheritance, the starship, the unusual circumstances surrounding it. Well, I assure you, it's as unusual as it seems, but it's very real, and I'm here to guide you through it. Elliot opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His mind was still trying to catch up. He had been a mechanic for most of his life. How was he supposed to suddenly inherit an alien starship? Was it even real? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Gregory continued, not waiting for Elliot's overwhelmed reaction. You see, Valcor Ithari, the individual who left you this inheritance, was a prominent figure in his home system. While Earth was dealing with its own affairs, Ithari's race, the Ithrans, developed a starship capable of extraordinary feats. The Vanguard, as it's known, was once a powerful military vessel, capable of faster-than-light travel and equipped with advanced weaponry and defense systems. It's no ordinary ship, Mr. Morrison. Gregory's eyes gleamed with something like excitement, but also a professionalism that felt out of place with what he was describing. It seemed surreal, as though the lawyer were speaking about something much more mundane, like a piece of property, rather than an alien warship. Mr. Ithari was a man of complexity. He lived a life few could understand, and his actions often defied logic and reason. He made a choice, just before his death, to leave the Vanguard the last of its kind to you, Mr. Morrison. I cannot begin to explain why, only that the documents clearly state that you are the sole beneficiary of this vessel and its contents. He paused, clearly gauging Elliot's response. Elliot felt as if his brain had just short-circuited. But, I don't know anything about starships. How am I supposed to even fly something like that? Or take care of it? He felt ridiculous, saying the words out loud, as if the very act of speaking them would confirm that he wasn't dreaming. Gregory smiled, a slight but knowing smile, as though he were expecting this reaction. Well, Mr. Morrison, he said, leaning forward. That's where the terms of the inheritance become interesting. He opened the binder in front of him and slid a small, metallic disc across the table. It shimmered in the light, catching Elliot's attention immediately. He picked it up, his fingers instinctively wrapping around it, feeling its cool surface. This, Gregory continued, is the key to accessing the Vanguard. It contains the ship's AI core and a set of instructions for its activation. You won't be alone in this, Mr. Morrison. The ship is programmed to respond to you, to guide you in the process of its restoration and operation. It's been dormant for a long time, but the ship is functional, or at least, it can be made functional with some effort. Wait, so, you're saying that this thing is alive? Elliot asked, holding up the disc. In a way, Gregory replied. The Vanguard's AI was designed to operate the ship autonomously, but it requires a human pilot to activate its systems and provide a point of control. The ship is more than just a machine. It has been designed with an interface that adapts to its operator. In your case, it will adapt to you, Mr. Morrison. Elliot ran his thumb over the metallic surface of the disc, its strange, alien design running along the edges. But why me? I mean, how does this make sense? I'm just a mechanic. Why would this alien leave something like this to me? Gregory leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. That is the most interesting part of the inheritance, Mr. Morrison. According to the documents, Mr. Ithari saw something in you. He believed that, despite your apparent lack of experience with such things, you had a unique set of qualities that made you worthy of this responsibility. Maybe it was your technical mind, your problem-solving ability, or perhaps it was the way you see the world. I cannot say for sure, but one thing is clear. He chose you. And now, you must decide how you wish to proceed with the legacy he left behind. Elliot stared at the disc, still trying to make sense of it all. He was a mechanic. That was it. He had never dreamed of space travel, of piloting a warship, or dealing with intergalactic affairs. But here he was, holding the key to an alien starship, the promise of adventure or disaster hanging in the air like a heavy fog. He wasn't sure if he was ready to take on such a responsibility. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to. But the idea of walking away, of leaving this mysterious inheritance behind, seemed impossible. Part of him was drawn to it, to the unknown, to the potential to escape the humdrum existence he'd lived for so long. And yet, another part of him felt deeply unsure. It wasn't just the starship, or the idea of piloting it was everything that came with it. Alien politics, the unknown technologies of the Vanguard, and the purpose of this inheritance. The weight of it all seemed overwhelming. But then again, his life had been anything but exciting. It had been comfortable, sure, but there was a part of him that knew deep down that he wasn't made for comfort. He wasn't made to be a bystander in the world, forever watching life pass him by. Elliot took a deep breath and placed the disc carefully into his pocket. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he was certain of one thing. This was only the beginning. He had no idea what he was stepping into, but in this moment, in the quiet hum of the law office, he made a choice. He would take on this responsibility. He would see where the Vanguard could take him. The lawyer smiled knowingly, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. You will be contacted shortly with more details regarding the ship's location and instructions on how to proceed. The process will take time, but everything you need will be made clear to you. You are not alone in this, Mr. Morrison. Elliot nodded, still feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. All right, he said, standing up and adjusting his jacket. I'll do it, but I need to know more. What's the next step? Gregory handed him a small holographic device. This will guide you. It will give you access to the Vanguard's mainframe and allow you to communicate with its AI. Follow the instructions closely, and you'll be fine. Elliot took the device, now more certain of his decision than ever before. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, his voice steady with resolve. Gregory nodded, his smile widening. Good. We'll be in touch soon, Mr. Morrison. Welcome to your new life. With that, Elliot left the office, the device clutched tightly in his hand, the weight of his inheritance now solidified in his mind. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he was no longer just a mechanic. He was now the owner of an alien starship, and the adventure of a lifetime had just begun. Chapter 2, A Ship of Scrap? The following week passed in a blur, as Elliot tried to grasp the reality of what he had inherited. Each day felt like a surreal dream. He couldn't focus at work. The vending machines, the escalators, the repetitive tasks that had once filled his days with purpose seemed so trivial now. He kept his head down, did his job, but his mind was always elsewhere, lost in the thoughts of the Vanguard. The holographic device Gregory had given him constantly blinked in his pocket, a silent reminder of the strange inheritance that awaited him. The waiting was the hardest part. He'd been told that he would be contacted by the lawyer's firm soon to provide him with more details about the ship's location. But every hour that passed seemed to stretch on forever, and Elliot was left wondering what he was getting himself into. Then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and the last of the city's noise faded away into a hushed quiet, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but Elliot knew immediately who it was. He answered quickly. Mr. Morrison? The voice on the other end was calm, confident, yet laced with an undertone of urgency. This is Gregory Hartwell. We've arranged for you to travel to the location of the Vanguard. Your first steps are ready. We'll send a shuttle to collect you within the next few hours. You'll need to be prepared. Prepared for what? Elliot asked, his heart racing. For the reality of what you've inherited, Gregory replied. The Vanguard is waiting, but it is not what you might expect. The line clicked off. Elliot stared at his phone, the words Gregory had spoken echoing in his mind. Not what you might expect. What did that mean? The Vanguard, his Vanguard, was supposed to be a ship of incredible power, a magnificent vessel capable of intergalactic travel, its technology so advanced that Earth couldn't even begin to understand it. But the way Gregory had said those words, so cryptic and ominous, filled him with an unsettling sense of doubt. He paced around his small apartment, unable to focus. His eyes darted over the cluttered room, the empty pizza boxes stacked in the corner, the books he'd never read, the half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table. It all felt so ordinary, so painfully ordinary compared to what was waiting for him out there. A starship. And yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that perhaps it wasn't all grandiose and futuristic like he had imagined. What if the Vanguard wasn't some magnificent, sleek, high-tech marvel of engineering? What if it was a rusted hunk of metal that hadn't moved in centuries? What if the alien inheritance he had received was nothing but a pile of scrap? He shivered at the thought. What if Gregory and the law firm had given him false hope, sold him a dream that didn't exist? Maybe the Vanguard was just a relic, a junkyard ship that couldn't even function anymore. How was he supposed to manage something like that? He was a mechanic, sure, but that was nothing compared to the complexities of an alien warship. The sound of his phone ringing again snapped him out of his thoughts, and this time, the number on the screen was unfamiliar. It was the lawyer's firm. His heart rate spiked. He answered quickly, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Morrison, I trust you're ready. Gregory's voice came through the speaker, his tone more clipped than before. A shuttle is on its way to collect you. It will arrive at your location within the next hour. Please ensure that you have everything you need, and be prepared for the journey. We'll explain more once you arrive. Elliot nodded, though he knew Gregory couldn't see him. All right, I'll be ready. As the call ended, Elliot's nerves took hold of him. The anxiety of what was about to unfold hit him with a sudden intensity. He was about to embark on a journey he had never dreamed of, an adventure that would take him far beyond the confines of his mundane existence. And yet, the uncertainty gnawed at him, that deep fear that he was about to face something much more complex and dangerous than he could handle. The question lingered in his mind: was he really prepared for this? Within the hour, a sleek black shuttle arrived at the edge of the city, hovering just above the ground with a soft hum. Elliot, standing on the steps of his apartment building, felt a strange thrill as he watched it descend. The vehicle looked like something from the future, smooth, streamlined, and designed to blend seamlessly into the alien aesthetics of the universe he was now thrust into. The door opened with a soft hiss, and Gregory's assistant, a woman dressed in a sharp uniform, stepped out to greet him. "Mr. Morrison, I presume?" she asked with a smile that seemed almost rehearsed. "Yeah, that's me," Elliot replied, still feeling out of place. He grabbed his bag, slinging it over his shoulder as he walked toward the shuttle. She gestured for him to follow. "Please, come aboard. We'll be leaving shortly. We're headed to the Vanguard." Elliot hesitated for a moment before boarding, his mind racing with the uncertainty of what awaited him. The shuttle was much more luxurious on the inside than he had expected. The interior was sleek, with soft ambient lighting and plush seats. It didn't feel like a typical transportation vehicle. It felt more like a high-tech command center. The seats were almost organic in their design, curving in a way that seemed custom-built for comfort. There was a hum of quiet activity around him as the assistant ushered him to one of the seats. As he sat down, she strapped him in, and the shuttle began to rise slowly off the ground. The skyline of the city began to recede beneath them, and Elliot's stomach churned as the reality of what was happening settled over him. They were heading to an alien starship, a starship that he had inherited. The shuttle moved quickly, effortlessly breaking through the atmosphere as it moved toward the far outskirts of the solar system. Elliot had no sense of where they were headed, but the increasing speed and the sensation of leaving Earth behind was enough to make his heart race. He looked out of the window, the blue and green planet shrinking behind them. The vast expanse of space spread out before him, dark and infinite, and yet somehow welcoming. For the first time, Elliot felt a strange connection to it all, a sense of awe and fear in equal measure. The thought of stepping into the unknown was both exhilarating and terrifying. The assistant remained silent as they traveled, but Elliot couldn't shake the growing sense of anticipation. He had to know what lay ahead. He had to understand whether this starship, his inheritance, was truly something to be excited about, or just another broken dream. The Vanguard had been described as an advanced alien warship, capable of feats beyond human understanding. But if it was true, why had it been left to rot? And if it was no longer functional, how could he, someone with only a basic knowledge of mechanics, possibly restore it? Was he ready for this? Finally, after what felt like hours of silence and anticipation, the shuttle slowed, and the vast shape of a starship appeared before them. No, not just any starship. The Vanguard. It was huge, more massive than any ship he had ever seen, its dark hull outlined against the black void of space. The shape of the ship was angular, sleek, and imposing, covered in a series of interlocking plates and energy shields that hummed faintly with residual power. The ship didn't look like the polished, pristine vessels he had imagined. It looked ancient. The metallic surface was marred with scars from what looked like battle damage. The ship's engines were dormant, and the hull, once gleaming, was now covered in patches of rust and decay. The Vanguard appeared abandoned, alone in the vastness of space, a forgotten relic. Elliot's heart sank as the shuttle drew closer, and the enormity of the situation hit him all at once. This wasn't the glorious starship he had dreamed about. It was a pile of scrap, an enormous, powerful, yet broken relic of a time long past. Its weapons and systems seemed dormant, its once grand purpose forgotten. But here it was, waiting for him, waiting for someone to restore it, to unlock its true potential. The shuttle slowly docked with the Vanguard at an airlock. Elliot felt a wave of unease wash over him. He was about to step onto a ship that, from every angle, looked as if it had been abandoned for decades. He had inherited a piece of history, but he wasn't sure whether it was something to be proud of or something he should have left behind. The airlock hissed open, and the assistant stood up, motioning for him to follow. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Morrison. We will get you settled and begin the necessary steps to restore the ship's systems." Elliot took one last look out the window at the ship before stepping through the airlock. What awaited him beyond was a mystery he wasn't sure he was prepared to face. But there was no turning back now. The Vanguard was his legacy, his responsibility, and no matter how much it looked like a pile of scrap, he had to figure out how to make it work. Chapter 3. Into the heart of the ship. Elliot's footsteps echoed through the dark, silent halls of the Vanguard as he followed the assistant into the bowels of the ship. The corridors were cold and empty, the walls covered in a layer of dust that had settled over decades of neglect. The lights flickered faintly as the assistant led him deeper into the ship, the low hum of the Vanguard's dormant systems the only sound in the air. The ship felt lifeless, like a giant skeleton waiting for someone to breathe life back into it. "This way," the assistant said, her voice the only thing breaking the silence. "We'll get you to the command center where you'll be able to begin the restoration process." The walls of the ship were marked with strange alien symbols, and the more Elliot looked at them, the more he realized they didn't resemble anything human. These weren't just signs of a foreign language, they were part of a larger system, a technology that had been designed to interface with something otherworldly. The Vanguard wasn't just a starship. It was a piece of living history, a weapon of untold power, and a mystery that Elliot was only beginning to scratch the surface of. They reached the central control room, a large space filled with a series of consoles, alien interfaces, and panels that looked as though they had been abandoned in haste. The chair at the command center was set in front of a massive holographic display, its center glowing faintly with a light that had not been seen for many years. The rest of the room was dark, illuminated only by the flickering lights of the systems. "Here you are," the assistant said, gesturing to the chair. "The ship's AI is dormant, but it will respond to you once you're ready to activate it." Elliot swallowed, his mouth dry. This was it. He was sitting in the captain's chair of an alien warship, surrounded by technology he couldn't begin to understand. The reality of it was overwhelming, but he couldn't afford to back down now. Taking a deep breath, he settled into the chair and placed his hands on the console. The moment his fingers made contact with the interface, a surge of energy ran through the ship, the AI flickering to life in an instant. "Welcome, Captain," a smooth, electronic voice said. "The Vanguard is at your command. Ready for initialization." The voice of the ship's AI seemed almost to vibrate through Elliot's bones as the ship's systems slowly began to hum, reviving in a way that felt too real, too tangible. It was as if the ship was waking up after a long slumber, its consciousness stirring to life in response to his touch. He could feel the floor beneath him shift ever so slightly, as though the Vanguard itself was adjusting, calibrating to his presence. The interface before him lit up with alien symbols and controls, all unfamiliar, none of them designed for a human hand. But as his fingers brushed over the controls, they responded. The strange technology seemed to adapt to him, adjusting itself to his touch, and for a moment, Elliot felt a strange sense of power, of connection, with something far beyond his understanding. Initializing systems, the AI continued, its voice calm, yet oddly welcoming. Primary engine cores are dormant. Weapon systems are offline. Communications array inactive. All systems require primary restoration. Elliot's heart raced. He had no idea what any of this meant, but the ship was alive again. And as the AI's calm, soothing voice filled the control room, a strange sense of weight settled on his shoulders. The fate of the Vanguard, this magnificent, ancient vessel now, rested with him. It wasn't just about restoring the ship. It was about unlocking its true potential, understanding its purpose, and figuring out exactly what had brought it to this point of ruin. He leaned forward, his palms sweating against the cool console. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, unsure of what to expect. Was there a manual? A guide for a human mechanic who had no business even sitting in this chair? The AI's response came immediately, a soft flicker on the holographic screen as it displayed a series of blueprints for the ship. Some of the designs were incomprehensible, the shapes alien and complex. Others, though, were oddly familiar systems that could be repaired, parts that could be adjusted. It was still an overwhelming amount of information, but at least it was a starting point. "You must restore the primary systems, Captain," the AI replied, its voice unwavering in its calm. "The ship's power core must be reactivated. The weaponry must be calibrated. Once the primary systems are online, I will be able to assist you with the advanced systems that require attention. But first, we begin with the basics." Elliot swallowed. "The basics," he muttered to himself. "Right. Basics. His hands hovered over the controls as the display shifted, offering him a rundown of the ship's critical systems. The engine cores needed power, the weapon systems needed recalibration, and the communications array, well, that was down entirely, perhaps even beyond repair. But everything about the Vanguard was alien to him. Each panel, each piece of machinery seemed to hum with a foreign energy, a reminder that he was far from equipped for this task. Still, something inside him stirred, a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was capable of. Maybe it was because, for the first time in his life, he wasn't just going through the motions. He wasn't just fixing things that didn't matter. This ship was something real. It was ancient, powerful, and mysterious, and it needed him to restore it. As his hands slowly began moving over the interface, the ship's core started to hum softly, the energy flowing through it with a life of its own. The entire room seemed to vibrate with power. The systems were responding, however, sluggishly, and the Vanguard's dormant soul was waking up. The engine core came online first, the artificial intelligence guiding him step by step through each necessary process. It was tedious, intricate work, but it was something Elliot could manage. He wasn't the best mechanic, but his hands were steady, his mind focused on the task in front of him. Hours passed. The ship hummed to life around him, its once dormant power systems gradually coming back online. The weapons systems flickered to life, their array of energy weapons slowly warming up. Each success brought a sense of accomplishment, but Elliot knew there was more work to be done. A small victory, in the grand scheme of things, but a victory nonetheless. The Vanguard was slowly returning to its former glory. As Elliot worked through the endless tasks, the AI occasionally provided him with feedback or guidance, though it remained mostly silent, content to allow him to figure things out for himself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last system came online, the communications array. It flickered to life with a sudden burst of energy, and the AI's voice came through the speakers again. Communication system is fully restored, Captain. You now have access to external channels. The Vanguard is ready for full functionality. Elliot sat back in the chair, his hands trembling from exhaustion. The ship had responded, but now, it was his responsibility to decide what came next. What was he supposed to do with a fully functional alien warship? The answer wasn't obvious. The Vanguard was powerful, but it was also a relic, a ship that had been abandoned for reasons he didn't understand. His inheritance had turned into something far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The AI's calm voice interrupted his thoughts. Captain, there are external forces waiting for your command. The ship's sensors have detected incoming vessels. Elliot's blood ran cold. Incoming vessels? Was someone coming for the Vanguard? Had the ship been followed? Or worse, was it a trap? He quickly accessed the ship's sensor array and saw several ships approaching from the farthest reaches of the system. They were not human. Who are they? He asked, his voice tense. Unknown, the AI replied. Vessel signatures do not match any known species. They are not friendly. A sinking feeling hit Elliot's gut. The Vanguard was not a harmless relic, it was a weapon, and now it was in his hands, ready to be used. But would he be able to control it? Would he be able to protect himself from whatever these alien ships were planning? He took a deep breath and stood up from the chair, his hands sweating as he faced the monitor, watching the incoming ships. This wasn't a simple inheritance anymore. This wasn't about learning how to fly a starship. This was about survival. He was in control now, but the question was, could he use the Vanguard's might for good, or was he about to get himself caught up in something far bigger than he could handle? The Vanguard had awoken, and with it, a new chapter in his life had begun. What came next was entirely in his hands. Chapter 4. Into the Abyss. Elliot's mind raced as he surveyed the incoming ships on the monitor. His pulse hammered in his chest, his thoughts scattered as he struggled to process the situation. The Vanguard was ready for action, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next. Alien vessels, unknown intentions, and a ship he had only just begun to understand. It was too much. Too much for one person to handle, but there was no one else. He was the one who had inherited the ship. He was the one who had activated it. And now, he was the one who had to defend it. The AI spoke again, its voice calm but tinged with something like urgency. Captain, I have initiated combat protocols. The Vanguard is armed and ready. Weapons are locked on incoming targets. Elliot's hands trembled as he hovered over the console. The Vanguard was more than just a ship, it was a weapon, and it had been built for something far more important than the life he had led. As the alien ships drew closer, He had only moments to decide. "Activate defensive shields," Elliot ordered, his voice steady even though his insides were a mess of nerves. The ship responded instantly, its energy shields humming to life as they surrounded the vessel, a protective barrier that pulsed with power. The incoming ships were closing in on them, and they didn't look friendly. They were armed, and by the looks of their weapon signatures, they were ready to fight. The Vanguard's weapon systems powered up, the ship's once dormant turrets and energy cannons springing to life. Elliot hesitated for a fraction of a second, his finger hovering over the firing control. Could he do this? Could he engage these alien vessels, potentially risking everything? He had no choice. He had inherited the Vanguard for a reason. This was his moment. The ship was his to command, and the only way to survive was to face the danger head-on. "Fire," Elliot commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. The Vanguard responded instantly, its weapons unleashing a barrage of energy blasts toward the approaching ships. The alien vessels retaliated almost immediately, their own weapons flashing in the dark of space. The sound of explosions shook the hull of the ship, and Elliot felt the intensity of the battle reverberate through the control room. His heart raced as the incoming fire intensified, but the shields held firm. The Vanguard was built for this. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for control, for his place in the universe, and for the ship he had inherited. The alien ships circled around, trying to flank them, but the Vanguard was faster, its maneuvering thrusters kicking in as Elliot sent it into a sharp turn. He could feel the ship responding to his commands, almost like it was alive, like it was connected to him. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was the captain of this vessel, and it was his responsibility to ensure its survival. The battle raged on, but with each passing minute, Elliot grew more confident. The ship's systems were responding to him in ways that he could hardly believe. The alien ships, though powerful, were no match for the Vanguard's firepower and agility. One by one, they were forced to retreat, their shields failing as the Vanguard's weapons tore into them. As the last of the alien ships fled into the black void, Elliot sat back in the captain's chair, breathing heavily. The battle was over. The Vanguard had proven its worth, and so had he. But as the dust settled and the ship returned to a tense silence, Elliot knew that this was just the beginning. The Vanguard was his inheritance, his responsibility, and no matter how daunting the future seemed, he was ready to face whatever came next. He had inherited more than just a ship. He had inherited a legacy, and the adventure was just beginning.